Aloha and welcome to Botany 101. My name is Angela Nishimoto. So today we're going to do flowers, fruits, and seeds. Okay? So for our outline of topics, we're going to talk about the flower, okay, its function and its parts. We're going to once again go through some differences between dicots and monocots. We're going to talk about vegetables and how they differ from fruits and how fruits differ from vegetables. Okay. We're going to talk about dispersal of fruits and also dispersal of seeds. Okay, we're going to talk about the seed, and we're going to talk about dormancy and germination. Okay? So first of all, the flowering plants number about 250,000. Okay, the flowering plants are synonymous with angiosperms, the Anthophyta, and the Magnolia phyta. Okay, so the flowering plants are about 250,000 species. And there are 11 species of flowering plants that account for about 80% of the world's foods, at least 8 of them in the Poaceae or the grass family. And of course, this includes things like wheat, rice, corn, barley, rye, and oats. So the function of the flower is to do sex, to do sexual reproduction. Remember we talked about the fact that in sexual reproduction you have 2 parents, one a sperm donor, one an egg donor, right? In asexual reproduction you just have 1 parent. Okay, so the flower, the whole purpose of the flower is to do sexual reproduction. Okay? Now size. The size ranges. Okay, duckweed, also known as Wolfia columbiana. Okay, the flower is only 1/10 of a millimeter large. These are actually individual duckweed plants. Okay, so they're very tiny. Now Rafflesia, the flower, there are different species of Rafflesia, which is a plant from Indonesia, and it can reach 1 meter or more than 3 feet in diameter, the individual flower. Here's a look of a Rafflesia flower. You can tell it's kind of like a meaty red color. Okay, so this is a kind of plant that is probably pollinated by insects or some other kind of pollinator that's attracted to carrion or dead bodies, okay, like flies. Okay. Now the corpse flower, also known as Amorphophallus titanum, the Titan arum, okay, has the single largest inflorescence. Okay, so this part here is where the flowers are, okay, and it's a typical arum family member, okay. So it has the odor of rotting flesh. It attracts pollinators such as carrion beetles and flies. Okay, so this can be 9 feet tall, okay, this whole thing. So this part here is called the spadix. Okay, that's the place where the flowers are, and this is called the spathe. It's similar in formation to the flowers of kalo or taro, also similar to the flowers of anthuriums because they're actually both in the same family as this Titan arum is. Okay. Now, in terms of the color of the flowers, it can be any color, a combination of colors of the rainbow, including black or white, all colors you can possibly think of. Okay, you can see here a nice image of multiple colored flowers, pinks and snapdragons, chrysanthemums. Now texture, it can be any texture. It can be filmy and transparent, it can be thick and leathery, it can be spongy to sticky, it can be hairy, it can be prickly, it can even be dewy wet. Okay? And the flowers are inconspicuous to showy, even downright beautiful, as we know. We often associate flowers with beauty. And the scent of them, they could be unscented to overpowering. Okay, the scent can be exhilarating to seductive to putrid. Okay, so the scents of flowers are the basis of the perfume industry and also the animal repellent industry too. Okay, now the life cycle of a plant. Okay, it can go from germinating seed to a plant producing seeds in less than a month to 150 years. All right? So annuals have their cycle completed in one season, and then the plant dies after that. So the annual growth cycle goes from seed to vegetative growth, where the roots, the stems, and the leaves grow, vegetative growth. Then the plant flower, and then it fruits and seeds, and then it dies. Okay, that's the annual growth cycle. Okay? Now biannual life cycles take 2 growing seasons to complete the cycle. Okay, it goes to seed, okay, from seed, germinating seed, to the growth during the first year. Then the plant goes dormant, you know, things like beets, things like carrots. Okay, they store their food in their roots, and then they'll overwinter after they're dormant. Okay, then they grow in year 2, and then in the second year they'll flower, fruit, seed, and then they'll die after the second year. Okay, now we also have perennials. Okay, perennials may take several to many seasons to go from seed to seed-bearing plant, though some produce seeds in its first year. So from seed, it has vegetative growth, and then it may flower, and then it goes through a period of dormancy, and then it has vegetative growth, and it flowers again. So depending on the plant, it can actually live for many years. Okay? Now flower structure. Okay, what is it? It's a short shoot with modified leaves. All the parts of the flower are actually modified leaves. Okay? So it's a specialized branch at the tip of something called a peduncle, which may have smaller branchlets called pedicels. Okay? And according to Goethe, okay, alles ist Blatt, or it's all leaf. Okay? He was among the first to recognize that. Goethe was a philosopher, romantic philosopher, poet, scientist. Okay, now the parts of the flower include the sepals. Okay, the sepals are usually between 3 to many leaf-like sepals. They're usually the most leaf-like of the flower, and this part here on this diagram represents the sepals. And all the sepals collectively together are called a calyx. Okay, and they function in protecting the rest of the flower when the flower is in bud. The outer part of the bud, when you see a bud of a flower, are actually the sepals altogether. Inside of the sepals, in a perfect and complete flower, you have usually the colored part of and the showy part of the flower called the petals. Okay, and the petals, if they're present, generally function to attract a pollinator, whether through color or through form or through markings or through scent or from producing nectar. Okay, and all the petals all together are called the corolla. Right? Now interior to the petals are the stamens. Okay, stamens. They're the male part of the flower, stamens. Okay, all the stamens together are termed the androecium. Okay, that just means male parts. Andro means male, right? So here are the anthers or stamens. Okay, so the stamens are of 2 parts. You have the anther, the part that makes the pollen. Okay, the pollen is a male gametophyte that produces a sperm. And then you have the filament that joins the anther to the rest of the flower. Okay, so these here are the stamens, okay, the androecium. Now the pistil, so don't confuse pistil with pistil, P-I-S-T-O-L. They're completely different things. Because the pistil is actually the female part of the flower. That's why it's called the gynoecium. Okay? The gynoecium, okay, actually is like a tiny vase. Okay? Closed at the top. And it's made of 3 parts. You have the stigma, the receptive part that's usually sticky, the sticky stigma. It's sticky so that pollen will stick to it or adhere to it. You have the style, the tube that joins the stigma, and the ovary. The ovary has one or more ovules in it. Okay? So after pollination and fertilization, the ovary develops into the fruit usually. Okay? The ovule develops into the seed, and inside of the ovule you have the embryo. So the fertilized embryo develops, the fertilized egg develops into the embryo. Okay? It's like the pistil is like a tiny little vase with a closed top. Okay? Now some flowers are produced on its own peduncle, like this flower depicted here. With a solitary flower, there's only one flower in the inflorescence, but many other flowers are produced in groups of flowers known as inflorescences. Okay, now the dicots. Okay, the dicots are in a class called the Magnoliopsida. They used to be known as the dicotyledonnae. Okay, so we'll go over the characteristics of dicots. So generally, they have two cotyledons when the seed germinates. So here are the two seed leaves or cotyledons. Here's a little apical meristem here at the very tip, okay, which will develop into more plant. Okay, the roots tend to have a taproot system, so you can see these larger roots with smaller roots coming off of them. Okay, so the stem has vascular bundles in a ring formation. Remember the parts of an herbaceous dicot stem. You have the epidermis with the cuticle on top, right? The single layer epidermis. Then you have the cortical cells made of parenchyma cells, the cortex. Then you have the ring of vascular bundles, right? The vascular bundles are made of fibers, phloem, vascular cambium, and xylem. Okay, and then in the center you have the pith. Okay, so this is like a typical herbaceous dicot stem. Okay, now the leaves of dicots are also netted veined. Okay, they have netted venation, so this one happens to have pinnate netted venation. Okay, now lastly, dicots have floral parts in 4s or 5s, or groups of 4s or 5s, multiples of 4s or 5s. Okay? Now the monocotyledonnae, or what used to be called the monocotyledonnae, okay, it's now known as Liliopsida. All right? They're mainly herbaceous. Okay, they're thought to have evolved from primitive dicots. Okay? So they have one cotyledon when the seed germinates. They have a fibrous root system. You can see some fibrous roots. So here you can see some corn. Yeah. Fibrous root system. This looks like green onion, maybe. I can't tell. Now the stem has their vascular bundles that look like this, and they're scattered throughout the whole section, okay, of the stem. All right. So lilies, grasses, orchids, irises, palms, anthuriums, these are all different types of monocots. Okay. Now the leaves of monocots, recall, are parallel veined. Remember that onion we looked at? Okay. And they have their floral parts in 3s. Okay. Now why don't we go take a look at some flowers in the flower model, all right? Okay, here we have the flower model, okay? So this is actually another complete and perfect flower. Now a complete and perfect flower means, that it has both the male and female parts in it. So there are such things as perfect flowers that are not complete, because complete flowers actually have all 4 parts of a complete flower in it: the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and the pistil. Okay. Now on this flower model here, okay, we have the most leaf-like part here on the outermost part. Okay, and these are called the sepals, collectively known as a calyx. Okay, they function in order to protect the flower when the flower is in bud. Okay, now these colored parts here, okay, interior to the calyx or interior to the sepals, are the parts that tend to attract the pollinator, and these are the petals, just like you saw in that little diagram. So this is like a little model of a complete and perfect flower. Okay, so interior to the petals, which are collectively known as a corolla. Okay, remember they function in attraction. Okay, you have the male parts of the flower. Okay, the male parts of the flower are the stamens. They're the male parts of the flower, and they produce pollen. Okay, the anther produces pollen. So here's a little cutaway of the anther with the little pollen grains inside. And then here you have the filament that joins the anther to the rest of the flower. Okay, the filament here. Anther and filament. Okay, now in the center you have the female part of the flower called the pistil. Okay, you have the receptive stigma, the sticky stigma, the stylish style, women are stylish, right? And then you have the ovary, which everybody knows is the female part. So you may have one or more ovules in here, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some flowers. Some dicot and monocot flowers, okay? Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 different kind of dicots, okay? And what we can see here is that the dicots, in fact, this one with the blue flower, the blue days, actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. Okay, dicots have petals, and sepals in groups of 4s or 5s. So we have 5 petals here. In this red ixora, or this orange ixora, this one here has 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. This beautiful hibiscus hybrid. Okay, this is hibiscus sinensis, Rosa sinensis. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. Okay. It also has 5 stigmas. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now this here is noni. Okay, this is a noni inflorescence. Okay, attached to the leaf. Okay, so if you look at the leaf and you can see the venation, and you look at the flower and you count the floral parts, would this be a dicot or a monocot? Okay, so we'll leave you with that question. Now on this side of the tray, these are 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of monocots. Okay, so we have 4 different types of monocots. Here, a spider plant is actually along a runner. Okay, this is a runner, and here's a little baby plantlets. So you can do vegetative reproduction from these runners, which is like a horizontal above ground stem. Okay, and you have these flowers, which have floral parts in 3s. You have 1, 2, 3 sepals, 1, 2, 3 petals. In the case of this flower, both the sepals and the petals look similar to each other, and that's what's known as tepals, T-E-P-A-L-S. Okay? Now here we have 2 different kinds of irises, and you can see that the floral parts are 1, 2, 3. Not only do you see the floral parts are in 3s, but you actually see these markings on them. Okay, these markings on this iris and also this iris here are what they call nectar guides, honey guides, or pollination markings. They actually direct the pollinator in to where the pollen is. Okay, because some pollinators can see in the ultraviolet. All right, so these have pollination markings on them, both these irises. And then this, which is agapanthus, also has tepals where you have 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 sepals and 3 petals, all of them similar to each other. Okay, so here we have some dicots and monocots and the contrast between the 2. Okay, so let's go back to the computer. Okay, here we are again. Okay, now we're going to talk about fruits. Okay? So in 1893, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Nix versus Hedden, okay, declared that the tomato was legally a vegetable, okay? Because people tend to think that fruits are all sweet and dessert-like, okay, whereas vegetables tend to be more savory and used in salads or as a main course kind of food. But of course, a tomato is botanically a fruit, okay? So what is a fruit? A fruit is usually a mature ovary with other parts, and it usually contains seeds. So you see this inside of the tomato with the seeds inside of it. So botanically, a tomato is actually a fruit, even though legally tomatoes are actually vegetables. Of course, they're fruits. Okay, now let's get into vegetables review. Okay, so vegetables can be leaves, okay, such as in lettuce, cabbage, and onion. All right, so those are leaf blades and maybe part of the petiole or at least the midrib. Okay, remember that you have lettuce and cabbage and onion, two onion leaf bases actually make up most of the parts of a bulb. Okay, now a petiole, what is a petiole? It's a leaf stem, right? It's part of the leaf. So celery, believe it or not, is not a stem. Remember, stems have nodes and internodes. Okay, celery does not have nodes and internodes. So celery is actually a petiole. Okay, all right. So then we also have the fact that stems, such as the Irish potato, are also considered to be vegetables. So we see so far that you have leaves and stem, okay? And you also have roots, such as beet, carrot, sweet potatoes, okay, being considered vegetables, okay? Whether they're starchy or not, they're still considered vegetables because they're actually vegetative organs. The vegetative organs of the plant are the roots, the stems, and the leaves. But not only them, but also flowers, like broccoli and cauliflower. These are actually flowers, okay, are considered to be vegetables. And also flower buds, such as artichoke, okay, artichoke. I was going to buy some artichoke, but they were like $3.50 each, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's too expensive. But you can remember that artichokes are actually flower buds, okay? So now we're going to go back here and go take a look at some vegetables. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so take a look at this tray. Check it out, okay? So we have some example of leaves, such as this lettuce here. Okay, it's been chopped up, but it's still recognizable as lettuce. We have the leaf bases of onion. This one here is a yellow onion instead of the red onion that we've seen before. Okay, and then we have the petioles of a leaf, like the celery here. Okay, and of course the celery, you can see the parts of the blade at the very top. Okay, now we have a root, a sweet potato root. Okay, so these are all vegetables, roots, leaves, and then we have stems, such as this ginger rhizome, which is more like a spice, but still. And we have this, so remember rhizome, ginger rhizome, which is an underground horizontal stem, so-called ginger root. Okay, and here we have araimo or dashin. Okay, this is also a stem. It's a vertical underground stem called a corm, right? And remember this, a tuber, the potato, also underground. Okay, but it's also a stem. Okay, a storage stem swollen with starches and carbohydrates. Okay, then lastly here we have this flowers of broccoli. Okay, flowers on these pedicels and peduncle. Okay, all right, that's it. Now let's go back to the computer. Okay, here we are back again. Okay, now we'll go to the fruits. Okay, now fruits develop from flowers. Okay, so only flowering plants can have fruits. Okay, it only occurs in flowering plants. All right? So fruits may be fleshy, or they may be dry at maturity. Okay, they may split, or they may not split. Okay, depending on the kind of fruits. So we're going to go into fruit types. Okay, first of all, fleshy fruits. Okay, so simple fleshy fruits develop from one flower with a single pistil. Okay, only one flower with one pistil. Those are simple fleshy fruits. Okay, so a drupe is an example of a simple fleshy fruit. Okay, it has a single seed that's enclosed by a hard, stony pit. Okay, some examples of drupes are peaches, nectarines, plums, all those stone fruits, olive, cherry, lychee, mango. Those are all drupes, as well as coconuts. Okay, coconuts are drupes actually. Okay. Now a berry, okay, develops from a compound ovary and usually has more than one seed. There's some exceptions to this rule. There's avocado and there's dates. Okay, those actually are single-seeded berries, right? But examples of berries are kiwi fruit, tomato, and guava. Okay, so true berries have thin skins and soft flesh, like this nice kiwi fruit here with all this little black seeds. Yeah. It's actually Chinese gooseberry, but the New Zealanders got famous for growing and marketing them as kiwi fruits. Okay. Now, peepo, okay, these are berries that have thick rinds. Okay, and they tend to be fruits of the pumpkin family, the Cucurbitaceae. They include watermelon, cantaloupe, and cucumber. So you see here this rind here, this thick rind. So these are berries with a thick rind. Okay, even a cucumber has a rind on it. Okay, so this is our example of peepos. All right. Now Hesperidium fruits are berries that have leathery skins with oils in them. Okay, and generally they're members of the citrus family, the Rutaceae. Okay, of course you include oranges, lemons, kumquats, limes, grapefruits, pomelos. Okay, and generally their interior sections are divided, okay, into separate compartments. These are actually each of them standing for carpel or folded over leaf with seeds inside. Okay, so this is actually a compound fruit, okay, not a simple fruit. Okay. Now we also have pomes, pome fruits. Okay, they include apple and pear. So why are they not berries? Why are they pome fruits? Okay, why are they not berries? They have several seeds, they are thin-skinned. Okay, well, the reason why that they're considered to be pome fruits and not berries is that this part here that we eat, this kind of fleshy part here, actually develops from receptacle tissue, okay, which is the part that subtends the rest of the flower. This papery part here that we generally don't eat with the seeds inside of it, this is actually the ovary, okay, just like this pear. So apples, pears, quinces, these are examples of pome fruits. So this part is the part that we eat of a pear, and here's the part we don't eat, that's enclosed by the ovary wall, okay? Now another kind of fleshy fruit is what they call an aggregate fruit. Okay, it comes from a single flower with an aggregation of pistils. Okay, more than one pistil, or maybe a few too many pistils. Okay, so the pistil develops into a fruitlet. Okay, and these fruitlets are a clustered unit. Okay, the clustered units on the receptacle. Okay, so these raspberries, each of these little fruitlets on the raspberry represents a single pistil. Okay, but this actually comes from a single flower. Okay, and strawberries are not just aggregate fruits, they're also known as accessory fruits, because you know the little so-called little seeds on the outside. These are actually individual fruitlets called achenes, okay? And they're all on the outside of receptacle tissue. Okay, so it's an aggregate fruit, it's also an accessory fruit. Okay? Now the last type of fleshy fruit type that we're going to cover are the multiple fruits. Okay? So multiple fruit comes from several to many flowers on an inflorescence. Okay? So you have a single fruit developing from multiple flowers. So multiple flowers go into making a multiple fruit. Okay? So pineapple, all those little lozenge-shaped areas on the pineapple are actually individual flowers. Okay? A fig, okay, has these flowers on the inside. Okay? They have a relationship with wasps that are so intimate and so dependent upon each other, it's very hard to figure out who actually initiated the relationship and like that, because these fruits do not develop unless a wasp forces her way inside and lays her eggs, okay, in the little flowers. So every one of these little things actually represents a flower, okay? So those are the fleshy fruits. Now the dry fruits include the dehiscent fruits. It means the fruit is dry at maturity and it splits when it's mature. Okay, that's what dehiscent means, to split. Okay. And one kind of dehiscent fruit is the follicle. Okay, follicles have one split. All right. So plants that have follicles as fruits include milkweed, also stephanotis, also locally African tulip trees. They all have follicles as their fruits. Okay, dry fruit that splits along one seam when mature. Then we have the legumes. Okay, the legumes split along two seams. Okay, so some example of legume fruits include the koa haole, okay, which is a foreign koa, and the royal poinciana. Okay, we've seen both of these before. Or actually we saw the poinciana before, but we sort of talked about the koa haole before. Okay, so they split along two seams when the fruit is ripe. And then we have a capsule. Okay, capsules have 3 or more splits in them or 3 or more pores. And they include orchids, the poppies, and also how. Okay. So these have capsules as their fruits. All right. So those are the 3 types of dehiscent fruits: the follicle, the legume, and the capsule that opens along 1 split, 2 splits, or 3 or more splits. Now, if we have dehiscent fruits, then we also have indehiscent fruits as well. Okay, that means they don't split when the fruits are mature. Okay. So first of all, we have the achene, which we talked a little bit about before when we were talking about the strawberry. Okay, what it is that it's a seed where the base of the seed is attached to the fruit only at one point. Okay, you have the edible kernel and its husk. So so-called sunflower seeds are actually fruits called achenes. Okay. Another kind of indehiscent dry fruit is a nut. Okay. It's a one-seeded fruit that's similar to achenes, except they're larger and tend to be sturdier. Okay, so acorns are an example of the nuts. So things like walnuts, things like almonds, okay, things like Brazil nuts, they're not truly nuts, okay? Just like strawberries and raspberries and mulberries are not really berries, although blueberries are berries, okay? Now another kind of indehiscent dry fruit is called the grain or caryopsis, okay? This is actually a fruit that has its wall united with the seed so they cannot be separated from one another. Okay, so examples of a grain and caryopsis are all the members of the grass family, including rice, wheat, and corn. Okay, those are all grains. Okay, so what you think of as a corn seed is actually a corn kernel, is actually a fruit. Okay, when you think of a rice grain, it's actually a fruit. It's not really a seed. When you think of a wheat berry, it's actually a fruit, okay, called a grain. Okay, then we have the samara. Okay, in a samara, like the maple, okay, the fruit wall extends out like a wing or has some kind of membrane that helps the fruit disperse, because of course maples actually twirl around when they're dispersed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dispersal. Okay, well, we'll talk about dispersal after we actually take a look at the fruits. Okay, here we are. We have a tray of fruits here. Okay, so a simple fleshy fruit is a drupe like this, nectarine. Peaches, nectarines, plums, okay, are these fleshy fruits. Okay, and then we have the more complex compound fruits called berries. And so we have the tomato, okay, which is a berry, right? It has many seeds inside it. It has a thin skin, soft flesh. Okay, so this is a berry. A kiwi fruit is also a berry. Okay, it's actually a thin-skinned, fleshy fruit with many seeds. And believe it or not, a banana is a berry as well. Okay, banana. Okay, the little black seeds inside, so-called seeds inside, are actually unfertilized ovules, because bananas are actually parthenocarpic fruits. Okay, that means they're, well, parthenocarpic comes from Parthenon, which is that building in Athens. Okay, and the building in Athens is actually the city of Athena, a virgin goddess. So a parthenocarpic fruit actually develops, all right, without fertilization. So the little black fragments that you see in here are actually unfertilized ovules. Okay, a banana is actually a fruit that was bred to make seedless fruits. Okay, and we have here a cucumber, an example of a peepo. Okay, berry with a thick rind, right? And then we have a Hesperidium fruit. Okay, here we have an orange. Okay, so very orange. It looks really good, right? It looks really juicy. I think this is a navel orange. So navel oranges actually have the navel part of it, and there's actually a Siamese twin inside here. Okay, so there's actually two oranges, and that little part that makes up the navel part of it is actually a Siamese twin. So this is an example of a Hesperidium fruit. Okay, so the citrus fruits are Hesperidium fruits. They have a rind, okay, with aromatic oils in it. If you scratch it and sniff it, it smells like orange, of course. You know, lemons will have that lemoning smell. All right. So we have that, and in fact, I'm going to slice it open. So you can see the segments inside. Okay, like this. Okay, so each of these segments actually represent a carpel, okay, a folded over area that makes up the pistil. Okay, so a pistil may have one carpel or may have many carpels. Okay, so these are all different locules inside of the ovary. Okay. Now here is an apple. Okay, do you remember what kind of fruit this is? Right? Remember, it's a palm fruit. Remember, this is a palm fruit, and it's not a berry. Why? Because most of the part you eat of it is actually receptacle tissue. And interesting about this too is that you see these little spots on the apple. You can see it on the close-up. Each of these is actually a lenticel. Remember lenticels? They're like little volcanoes that allow for gas exchange. Okay, so through the skin of this apple, which is kind of waxy to begin with, and they wax fruits also, they actually allow gas exchange with the external environment through these lenticels. Okay, so we can actually cut this one open too, and I can show you the, if I don't cut myself. Okay, so here we have the receptacle tissue here. Here's the ovary here, and the ovary part we do not eat. That what is actually makes a palm fruit, and not a berry. Okay. Now we have an example of another fleshy fruit that we haven't seen before, but it is actually a multiple fruit. Okay, remember that earlier inflorescence I showed you of the noni? Well, each of these little lozenges actually stands for where there was a flower. Okay, so noni, Morinda citrifolia, is actually a multiple fruit because it develops from multiple flowers. Okay, multiple fruits develop from multiple flowers. Okay, and we have some examples of some dry fruits. We have here an example of a follicle. This is from the African tulip tree. You can see here the seeds is actually covered with cellophane, so the seeds won't come out. Okay, but the seeds, of course, are wind dispersed. They have little wings on them or a little membrane around them. Okay, so this is African tulip tree, a follicle. Now this is a fruit of Royal Poinciana, Delanex regia. Again, it's actually a legume. Okay, it has two splits along here, one split here, one split on the other side. Okay, so this is an example of a legume. Okay, so there are literally thousands of different kind of legume fruits because the leguminosae, also known as the Fabaceae, are actually a pretty large family, the bean family. Okay. And then here we have another kind of dehiscent fruit known as a capsule. Okay, a capsule splits along more than two seams, so you have three splits or more. And this is a fruit of autograph tree. It's the one that has the leaves that you can actually write on, like with a pencil like that, and it'll actually keep the form of your writing on it. That's why they call it autograph tree, Clusia rosea. Okay, you can actually see where the seeds were in here. Okay. And the only kind of indehiscent fruit that I have to show you are the grains. Okay, so we have rice and we have wheat. Okay, so these, remember, are fruits. These are not seeds, even though they tend to look like seeds and we associate them with seeds. They're actually a fruit that is adhered to or actually is stuck to the seed inside. So you cannot actually tease them apart. Even if you try to dissect them, you can't dissect them apart because they're fused together. Okay? And this here, which I almost forgot, of course, is a coconut. Okay? And a coconut is actually a fleshy fruit known as a drupe. So a coconut is actually a drupe. Okay, I almost forgot about this. Okay? Anyway, so we can go back to the computer. Okay, here we are again. Okay, now we'll talk about dispersal. Okay, for one thing, fruits and seeds can be dispersed by wind. Okay, and why is dispersal important? It's important so that the seeds go far away from the mother plant, or at least a distance away from the mother plant. Okay, it prevents competition with the mother plant. It also prevents inbreeding with the mother plant. So wind is one way that plants are dispersed through their fruits or their seeds. So dandelion fruits, here they are. Okay, they have like a little parachute on them. You know, they're like a little parachute, so they float through the air. Everyone has seen dandelion fruits floating through the air. Okay, so this is the fruit, and for orchids, it's actually the seeds that are dispersed by wind, because orchids have seeds that are so fine they're like dust, because the seed doesn't have endosperm. It doesn't actually have a food reserve in it. That's why they need to have a symbiotic relationship with the mycorrhiza, which we talked about before. Okay? Now, another way that fruits disperse or seeds disperse is through water. Okay? So you can have water dispersed seeds, such as some sedges. So generally, sedges that are dispersed by water tend to have their seeds surrounded by inflated sacs. Okay? Whereas an alpaca kai, also known as Scivilla sericea, all right, they have spongy fruit, okay, with a lot of air spaces in it that allows it to float in water, lends it buoyancy, okay. Now, other ways that fruits are dispersed are through animals, of course. If pollination is sometimes affected through animals, so is dispersal in some cases, okay. So first of all, you have muddy feet. Okay, so shorebirds can actually carry fruits a very long distance, thousands of miles when they migrate. Okay, and some sedges like ahuava, okay, ahuava is actually named Meriscus javanicus. Okay, so the prototype is in Java, even though it's also native to Hawaii. It's native to Hawaii as well. It's an indigenous plant. That means it's native to Hawaii and other places as well. Okay. Now, another way that animals may disperse seeds or fruits, okay, is through getting stuck on its fur or its feathers, depending whether it's a mammal or whether it's a bird. Okay, so an example of that is a cockleburr, all right? So some ways that it can actually stick is through a mechanical means, such as barbs or hooks, or it can be sticky, like alena, okay, which we don't have here, but it's actually a fruit that sticks to birds' feathers a lot, and it's native to Hawaii. And the third way that dispersal happens through animals is that generally the fruit is or seeds are eaten and excreted. Okay? So some examples of that are blueberries, which is a berry, and ohelo, which is also a berry. Okay? So what happens is that some birds will actually pass the seeds to its gut in about 15 minutes, okay? But most mammals actually take about 24 hours for the seed to make its way from, mouth through the digestive tract to the other side, okay, about 24 hours. And there are some fruits that are eaten by Galapagos tortoises. It takes 2 weeks. They go from being eaten until it's excreted. And these seeds actually need to be going through that process through the gut of the tortoise in order for it to germinate, okay? Now, seeds, of course, develop from ovules, okay? So remember, the fertilized egg becomes the embryo, the ovules to become the seeds, and the ovary becomes a fruit. And seeds are made up of a seed coat, endosperm, and the embryo, okay? The seed coat is a protective outer part of it, outer part of the seed. Okay, the endosperm is the food reserves, and the embryo, of course, is a little baby plant. Okay, so here we have in this monocot fruit, right, this corn kernel, which is a fruit, you have the endosperm. In this case, it's a 3N, because generally endosperm comes about from fertilization of the polar nuclei with a sperm, so it has 3 sets of chromosomes in it. Okay, that we'll go into later in the semester. Okay, and here you have the cotyledon. Okay, part of the embryo here. The plumule, which is part of the shoot. Okay, so this is an example of a monocot. Okay, a bean is a good example of a dicot. And here you have the cotyledon, that's the main food reserve. Remember we saw cotyledons in an earlier slide? Okay, and here you have the embryo, okay, the little embryonic shoot and the little embryonic root. And outside of it you have the seed coat. Okay, and so the little baby plant is this embryo here, just like this is a little baby plant, just like an embryo inside a human womb. Okay? Now, dormancy and germination. Okay, dormant means sleeping. Okay? Some people find it hard to believe that seeds are really alive, but they are alive when they're viable, okay? What they're doing is they're doing respiration at a very slow rate, barely detectable, but it's actually breaking down, okay, compounds, converting them into molecules that it can use to keep itself alive. Okay, so dormancy can be either mechanical or physiological. Okay, in terms of mechanical dormancy, you have inhibitors in the seed coat or inside the seed or in the fruit itself. Okay, like some desert plants. Okay, they need to be washed away in order for the seed to germinate. Okay, now physiological dormancy means that the seed needs to be scarified, okay, in some way, which means it needs to be nicked or cracked. Okay, so here you see a person filing a seed. That's one way to actually cause breaking or dormancy. Okay, but in nature, generally abrasion by rocks or alternate freezing and thawing, okay, or bacterial action will bring about germination of the seed and break its dormancy. Okay. Now, a favorable environment is necessary for the seed to germinate. That means it needs sufficient quantities and types of water, oxygen gas, either light presence or its absence of light. Okay, so this actually happens. Okay, imbibition. Imbibition is the taking up of water. What it is these enzymes, it actually brings about the actions of enzymes that function in the cytoplasms of the cell. What they'll do is they'll convert proteins to amino acids, they'll convert fats and oils to soluble substances, and they'll convert starches to sugar, okay? And these soluble substances actually are taken to the embryo, and then the embryo has an increase in respiration, and then it starts to grow, okay, through mitosis and cell expansion. Okay. Okay, now some seeds, okay, are viable only for a few days. Okay, some are actually can be viable for a long time. Now, by law, okay, packets of seeds need to have an expiration date on them to give you an idea about how long the seeds will remain fertile for. Okay, so some seeds will just be a few days, some will take several years before they expire. Okay, now the sacred lotus, okay, is a plant that is sacred to the Buddhists. Okay, they call it a sacred lotus because it has its roots in the mud, you know, sort of like our temporal existence. We have our feet on the ground, our feet in the mud, but then the flower is crimson blooms under the heavens. Okay, so that's like a symbol of the good life, of somebody's good life. Okay, the sacred lotus, they found the seed of this in a dry lake bed in China, okay, in northeastern China. All right, it had been actually dormant for more than 1,200 years. Okay, it was in the black clay at about 1.5 to 9 feet depth. Okay, now the oldest known germinated seed that lasted for the longest time are lupine seeds from the Arctic tundra. They're estimated to be approximately 10,000 years old. Okay, so that's amazing, isn't it? 10,000 years. Now let's review what we went over. Okay, so we talked about the flower. We talked about the flower and its function and the flower and its parts. We talked about dicots and monocots, a reprise. We talked about fruits and vegetables. Okay, we talked about dispersal of fruits and seeds. And we talked about dormancy and germination. Okay? Okay, that's all we have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed today's lecture. It was fun to do. Okay, so good luck to you in your studies. Don't forget to contact me if you need help. All right, and we'll see you next time. Aloha.